Pirate School by Tanya Humphreys. Matilda watched the boys in the yard as they practiced their chosen skill. Usually, it was one passed down from their fathers, and in the academy, they would hone that skill as well as learn the others and the history of their ancestors. Billy Blackbird clashed swords with Randolph the Ripper. Wee Willie, he would later change the moniker to Big Bill. Watkins was waterboarding Eli the Eel, who himself was attempting to escape his ropey bonds at the same time. Razorblade Bob threw razor-sharp knives with lightning speed at a series of straw dummies hung from ropes that Vinny the Vile pulled, making them swing. This was the day before school started, the school for pirates. The Silverkill Academy was on a 120-foot-long ship with 2 masts. It had belonged to Billy's father, one of the most famous of all pirates, and would belong to Billy after he completed the academy. It was a boys-only academy. Matilda had cut off her long golden braids and carried herself with a swagger in boys' dungarees. She'd completed the disguise with plenty of dirt. Pirates were a soiled and stinking lot, and to fit in, she'd even rolled in horse manure because her female body exuded too delicate an odor when she sweated. She had asked the horse if it wouldn't mind defecating for her, and the stunned animal practically shat itself on the spot, shocked that a human could communicate with it. That was her power. She could talk to animals. The boys made fun of her because she couldn't practice her skills in the yard. To them she was Matt, just plain Matt, though the mice had told her they called her mumbling Matt behind her back. At swords, knives, torture, guns, she was okay and strived to do better. But it was hard being a nerd pirate. No one wanted to practice with her. Wicked Pete, who at 12 was already impressively sprouting red lip hair, stopped throwing knives at Inky the Squid, whose chosen specialty was thievery, but all the boys knew it was his wicked, deadly, and silent flatulation that named him Pete. The mice called him Mustache Pete, pointed to the dock. The instructors were boarding the ship, and excitement hung in the air like fattening rain clouds preparing to unleash a deluge of refreshing, life-giving rain upon a thirsty land. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stood in a line as the professors came on board. If they were impressed by the discipline the boys showed, they gave no indication. The 3 of them were bearded and gray and dressed in black robes. They wore rings on every finger of gold and gemstones that caught the afternoon sunlight and flashed tiny sparks like flint on steel. Chains of gold and platinum hung about their necks like mules' collars that daintily tinkled. Matilda knew they wore the finery against the somber professor's robes as a way of indicating what could be had taken from the world if one desired it so. "Well, looks like a fine crew we have this year." The tallest man in the middle of the 3 spoke when they stopped before the line of boys. He had a red macaw on his shoulder that bobbed in agreement. The line of 17 boys, and 1 girl in disguise, puffed at the compliment and stood like soldiers, eager to be obedient and excited to be taught from such masters as these 3 retired pirates. The dorm room below was adorned with the wanted posters of all 3. The tall middleman said to the first in line, "Billy, I remember your father. We dined together and shared whores on many occasions when I was just a greenie learning the ropes. It is a pleasure to have you aboard. I am Professor Silverkill and delight in training all of you." His assessing gaze fell across the line of students and stopped at Matilda. A crease speared his forehead, but he snapped out of it a second later and began his assessment of that year's students. "This is Paloma. She can answer any questions you have about sailing a ship such as this, and questions are not only welcome, they are encouraged." Paloma nodded again and said, "Hello, boys," in a voice that sounded like a little girl's. The boys giggled and Silverkill frowned. Paloma laughed like a big fat villain. Silverkill ignored her and the boys laughed until the pedagogue on Silverkill's left struck the wooden deck with his staff and glared at the young pirates one by one. The gnarled staff had a silver fox's skull at the top with a hinged jaw that snapped open and shut. The boys' eyes grew large. This was all so terribly awe-inspiring. The 3rd professor took notes in a leather-bound journal as the headmaster made his way down the line. Silverkill stopped at Matilda. The rest of the boys were watching and no longer at military-like attention. Silverkill said, "And how is it someone as delicate as you should be here? What is your skill, boy?" Matilda shivered on the inside and hoped it didn't show outwards. Before she could answer, Pete said, "He's crap at everything. He's special 'cause he talks to animals." He'd made air quotes at the word special. Billy said, "Yeah, totally useless. Can't fight worth shit." Just then an albatross flew over the deck of the ship. Matilda froze and followed the birds circling with her eyes. At last, she said, "Oh no, they're here." The boys scoffed and snickered. The teachers shook their heads slowly. The headmaster looked around and said, "Who, my dear boy, are they?" Matilda heard the rat cowering by the bunkhouse shriek a warning, so she ran off and ducked out of sight below deck where her rucksack was stashed. She put the dress on and donned her old bonnet, the one she'd sewn her old golden braids onto, and raced back to the deck. She slipped and slid a few feet. It was slick with blood. A Coast Guard was aiming a pistol at the crow's nest. Matilda slammed into his legs and his shot went wild. Paloma flew off with an indignant caw. The man whirled to her. "What the bloody hell?" Then calmed when he saw she was just a girl. The slashed-up body parts of the old pirates decorated the deck like bloody Easter eggs. The boys were being herded towards the deck plank. The Spanish Coast Guards were searching the entire ship and picking the jewelry off the body parts. A captain came running and knelt before her. "Are you okay? You hurt?" Matilda had apparently another skill. She brought forth tears worthy of an Oscar. "They held me prisoner. They were going to ransom me. Now," the captain said as he patted her back. "You're safe now, sweetheart. Come along." The last boys had halted to watch the exchange and Inky muttered, "Matt?" Bob elbowed him hard in the ribs. Matilda left with the Coast Guards in their carriage as the boys were herded and guided onto a cart pulled by two piebald mares. Razorblade Bob winked at her as they parted ways and Matilda blushed. Matilda was taken to a farmhouse on an island far from the Spanish coast where the elderly couple cared for girls while the authorities attempted to contact their parents. The girls were put to work on the farm and housed in the barn. Matilda was out feeding the piglets on her second day there when she spotted an albatross on a fence post by the field that led to the ocean. She said to it, "Please don't be frightened. Please help me." The enormous seagull at first looked alarmed. It shook its head as if to dislodge the human words and fluffed its wings as if preparing to fly. However, curiosity replaced the bird's anxiety, and as it tilted its head towards her, it said, "You are interesting and unique and quite pure of heart. How can I assist you?" "Oh please, where am I?" "Ibiza, a small." "Yes," Matilda interjected, waving her small hands like pale, frustrated birds. "I know my maps. I need to get back to Spain. And I apologize for being so rude." The albatross scoffed. "Himph. Quite a human trait for sure." Matilda reached in her pocket and pulled out a dried sardine. The bird's eyes lit up. "I have a whole sack of these fishies. I need that boat down there." She pointed to a rowboat at the little dock off the beach beyond the field. To make it to Denia. Denia was the most eastern town in Spain on the coast. The big sea bird's eyes lit up like a miser ain't golden treasure. He called out to his flock, and they flew in magically from all over the compass to help. Matilda waved goodbye to the flock of albatross who'd pulled the little boat across the Balearic Sea and headed to the center of town. She had changed back into her boy outfit, carried her burlap satchel on her back, and found a tavern bustling with activity. Taverns were hubs where much information could be gathered. Her luck was with her as the day turned to night. She recognized the horses outside the tavern. They had been the ones who'd carried the boys away to their prison and were still tethered to the same wooden cart. She approached them. They tried hard to ignore her. She pulled a couple of carrots fresh from the farm from her pocket and said, "Hi, pretty ones." The mare's eyes grew huge. The one closest said, "You can speak to us." "Whoa, trippy." "Yes, and I need your help." She gave them each a carrot as she told them of her search for the boys and how they could help. June and Josie, the piebald mares, arrived at the workhouse the boys were imprisoned in. It was 2:30 a.m. when Matilda peeked into the warehouse-like building through barred windows and saw it was a kitchen. It was spotless and clean and empty. She moved on and climbed up the building like a spider, like she'd been learning how to do in the school for pirates, wrenching her little fingers into crevices and finding footholds in the old bricks. She peeked in a window on the 3rd floor and saw bunks with bodies in them. Matilda whipped out her slingshot, and though never really good at it, she focused and sent a pebble to the head of the first boy. He awoke. What th? She went. Sh. The boy was Eli the eel. She detected a strain of his wicked scent as it wafted past. He said, "Matt?" "Yes. I've come to rescue you all." Eli started to speak, but she cut him off. She said, "Now it's your only chance. You need to all get down to the bottom floor to the kitchen. I have a cart and horses waiting. The noise will wake the guards, so we have to be fast and ready." "But." "No buts, just go." Matilda watched as Eli went from cot to cot, awaking the boys, and gesturing as wildly as a referee at a headball game. She saw them glancing at the window, then leaping from their thin and dingy covers. She climbed back down to the bottom floor where the mares were waiting outside the kitchen door. Thick hemp ropes were tied to the bars in the window. A light came on in the kitchen. Matilda cursed the boys for being so dumb and then realized a guard had come into the kitchen. The fat man was scratching his greasy leather tunic and looking into cupboards. Any second now, the boys would come upon him. He had a pistol in his belt but no sword. A rat popped up in the window before her. She stifled a shriek as foot thumps sounded from inside. "Oh no," she thought. The guard turned and pulled the flintlock from his belt. Matilda said to the rat, "Please help, I'll take you away from here to where you'll live fat and happy." The rat said, "And my family?" "Of course." The rat shrugged. It seemed used to humans that could talk to animals, as most rats, in Matilda's experience, had seemed. He said, "Okay." The rat, quick as a shadow, sped to the pistol-wielding guard, climbed up his boot and sank his teeth into the flesh behind the man's knee, severing a tendon. The man's gun went off. The sound was deafening and echoed off the kitchen's steel cabinets and ice boxes. Lights came on in the upper floors. The first boys entering the kitchen subdued the guard, who was howling in pain and rolling on the floor, by shoving a kitchen rag into his mouth, wrapping it tight with another towel, and binding his feet and arms together with kitchen twine like a trussed pig. The rest of the boys ran to the window as Matilda told the mares. Now, the horses strained a bit, but the building was old and the mortar crumbly. The window bars came out with a scaringe. The boys tumbled out the window and dove into the cart. The last 6 remaining in the kitchen turned to face the guards who'd entered. Razorblade Bob held them off by his frighteningly accurate throws. Kitchen knives flew with deadly accuracy. Bob threw not to kill but to maim and make bleed, shocking a person to roll into a pillbug's shape and quit the onslaught. The last 3 remaining guards looked at each other and shrugged. They obviously weren't paid enough to risk a blade to the eye, not even realizing that Bob had run out of knives and was now ready to throw spatulas. The boys whooped and cheered in the back of the wagon as Matilda led the horses back to the academy ship. At the ship 6 hours later, light was entering the sky. There were heavy purpley pink clouds and the wonderfully thick scent of salty water in the air. They boarded the ship and stood on the deck looking out at the horizon. Then at last they turned to Matilda. Inky said, "You're a girl." Wee Willie said, "And pretty freaking awesome. Right, guys?" A cheer went up and the boys rushed Matilda. It was the best she'd ever felt in her life. Only Razorblade Bob held back. Billy Blackbird said, "So what now? They'll be after us. We can't sail this ship." "Yes, we can," said Matilda. She looked to the crow's nest and said, "Paloma, got a question or two for you." The brilliant red parrot swooped down and landed upon the wheel. she said in a smooth, reassuring female voice. Yes, we can sail. She proceeded to give directions to all the boys. And one girl, Razorblade Bob, came to Matilda and said, I'm sorry the guys were so mean before. He put an arm around her and pulled her to him. Matilda was heated by the exchange and longed to kiss this boy pirate who had flirted with her when her secret had been revealed. She was at that age when young people started thinking of that sort of thing. Razorblade Bob bent slightly at the waist and kissed Matilda. It was light but passionate. Both pirates broke away from each other and grinned. Then Bob pulled her hat off, and a tumble of red curls fell about her shoulders, revealing she was also female. Monsters Eat Cakes by J. Duberg. This is a world like no other, brimming with mystery and teeming with danger, filled with hundreds of islands stretching across vast seas to those who live according to their own rules, seeking a life of freedom and advantage. This is a world of monsters, and some eat cakes. Not Sweeney Todd-style cakes, but fluffy cakes decorated with sprinkles. Unfortunately, not everyone lives. Mrs. Otter had been half elf and half otter after helping the king of otters from under a fallen rock. As a gift, he had given her otter shape-shifting and the ability to either be water elf or otter at will. Shape-shifting otters moved around elf towns during the annual Heritage Day festival to see the loud plays of the red dragon banished to the human world with flame-red hair and gaunt pale skin. The elves laughed at the former dragon king Kenya in his human form as he looked strange in the quiet English village selling pumpkins at Halloween, wearing orange and black long socks and a green elf costume, especially when the elf queen had erased his memories of the elves. During the Red Dragon War, Mrs. Otter's family was bombed into hissing mounds of burned flesh in the water elf homeworld of Tania. This memory haunted Mrs. Otter in her nocturnal nightmares. Her favorite happy memories were with her sweet family, splashing near the new dam they made together as a family that morning. Mrs. Otter chirped her joy at her playful children. Cute, shiny paws chase a pebble and roll it around each other's noses for fun, while Mr. Edward Otter flapped his tail to splash them all while adjusting his red check booty. Haha, Bernice, your chirp is so infectious I will smile for a month, called Mr. Otter. A fish came to see what all the fuss was about, and was caught for dinner, shredding its flesh into thin, tasty strands, so that her children can gobble up while grinning and wavy their paws. What a game of pebble that was, Mama. You find the smoothest pebbles, you're the best, beamed little Herbert Otter. Chuckling, Mrs. Otter laughed at the fading last bright memory before relinquishing her elf half along with those precious memories of her family to the elf queen's bluestone magnifier to keep safe. Mrs. Otter's close friend was a headmistress at the water elf prestigious Ilhelen School of Magic. She had agreed to remove the essence of the magic elf from Mrs. Otter, so that she could be a full otter monster and leave her sad elf memories behind of her burned family. The elf queen had offered to help, as Mrs. Otter had suffered so much. Strictly speaking, otters are not seen as monsters unless they scare humans or grow larger than black bears with their sharp fangs. However, once Mrs. Otter relinquishes her elf half essence, her unfettered shape-shifting abilities would lead her to develop into the size of a large tree. Mrs. Otter still preferred to wear fine clothes once a year to attend the elf festivals and enjoy the cake shops selling pretty little cakes. Thanks to her shape-shifting, she would shrink to the size of a human so as not to scare the elf villagers while enjoying their cakes. Looking at the neck of the customer and avoiding their gaze, she froze. Her stomach knotted, and the familiar feeling of wanting to hide in her room upstairs rooted her to the ground. Her warm tray of fragrant baked cakes had the customer lick their lips. Julie, lay out your gorgeous cakes, the line is out the door. The oven timer beeped and called Julie Strathorn back into her haven. Releasing the knot in her stomach, Julie took hold of a glass of water and gulped down some to ease her dry throat. Clicking open the oven door, the sweet steam hugged her face, and her previously taut expression spread into a radiant smile. Let me look at you, my beauties. Oh yes, golden and warm, ready for icing in a jiffy. Leaving them on the cooling shelf, Julie expertly slid in the next 4 trays of cakes. The smell of warm cakes grew the line of customers around the corner. My Annie loves Julie's cakes. Though I know she's a bit of an odd one, that Strathorn. I have never seen her mutter a word to a customer. I once said good morning to her, and her hairline sprang a leak. Her sister took the tray of lush cakes from her and ushered her back into the kitchen. All a bit odd if you ask me. My older sister knew her at school, and Julie was like it then. The only time she spoke was to say what the ingredients were in one of her cakes. Then she stared at my sister's neck, choked, and ran to the drinking tap for water. We avoided her after that, which she seemed to prefer. I know those Strathorns like goat blood, but like to replace their blood craving with bacon, but she isn't hiding it that well, I can tell you. Miss S., Samantha Goatgrass said, folding her arms and leaning towards Miss Dolly Goat, her cousin on her mother's side. Well, at least her cakes are good, but once a year they attract these strange elves and otters. That Julie Strathorn can nod to those weirdos, but I expect she is weirder just like them and nothing like us nice grass-eating goats. Talking of grass, Mrs. Goatgrass, the grassmongers have a special on grass cakes today, 10 for a groat or 50 for a grass rock. Daisy nudged her cousin's elbow as Julie Strathorn slowly shuffled into the shop with another batch of warm grass buns and blue cupcakes. Both the elves and the goats in the line breathed in the swirl of allure that tempted them closer. Julie's sister Bretta was confident of keeping this throng calm. I have bagged 10 grass cakes, so next customer please. Right behind this bag are 10 blue cupcakes that sing when you bite into them, so keep your place in the queue so you can munch these beauties. Those who had stepped out of the queue slid back to their place and licked their lips. The timer went off, and Julie's tense face and white knuckles released to return to her no customers allowed neat quiet kitchen bakery. Mrs. Otter asked for her special order in a white cake box with a blue fish emblem of her water elf and otter-shaped shifting self on it. Thank you, Julie, for your wonderful baking. I shall eat these in the park with some cold milk. Mrs. Otter knew Julie hated crowds, and their bakery was always packed with hungry customers. Oh, we're now selling milk from Bertha's hog. Mabel had a litter of 3 hoglets, so there is loads of milk to spare. Bretta explained, holding up a covered white jug with blue muslin fabric stretched over it. Yes, please, that would go with my annual treat, Bretta. How much is that? Mrs. Otter lifted her blue silk flap to reveal her woven grass bag, ready to pay. That's 2 groats, please, as we have a special on today because of the festival. The water elves have kindly put a spell on the jug so it doesn't run out all day. So don't push, you can buy some for 1 groat a cup. Here's my cup measure ready. Beretta held up the white thin cup with the water elf blue moon vine emblem on it, which was one of Ilhelen's water elf houses. Oh, that's a bit posh, Bretta. You getting help from one of the royal houses near Ilhelen? Mrs. Goatgrass nudged her cousin, who giggled. A water elf lifted her head to stand over both goat monsters and stare closer at how sharp their front claws were. The water elf scrunched up her face and rolled her eyes as she stepped back in line. Mrs. Otter nodded to Julie and Bretta and flapped her tail from her blue, well-made dress to hold her cake box. With 2 small brown hands, she held the lush yellow milk and sipped it as she moved towards the bakery exit. Mrs. Otter's webbed feet made a flip-flap sound on the dark blue-tiled bakery floor, causing a low echo which made the 2 goat monsters giggle. Sighing with joy at the moment when she would bite the fish sponge, drizzled with sticky blue icing, Mrs. Otter moved towards the nearby park. Sitting on the dirty wooden park bench, Mrs. Otter licked each paw after each mouthful until the box and cup had no crumb or dreg. Excuse me. A tiny voice in her ear surprised Mrs. Otter, causing her to flap her tail on the path in surprise. Who's there? Mrs. Otter could hear wings, but could not see anyone. Look ahead. I'm right in front of you. I am an earth elf and need to know how to bake cakes, so that I can help free my sister from the bedroom of the water elf queen. Mrs. Otter then noticed the hovering clump of moss with eyes. Hello to you. Mrs. Otter smiled. Can you help me? The earth elf said in a high voice near Mrs. Otter's face. I know a baker who doesn't like crowds who will think about helping you. Tell her what to make, and she will make it for you. We earth elves love water elf sponge cupcakes. Can she make them? My sister hasn't been fed since Queen Elvina left to go to Elhelen in September last year. The family has forgotten to feed her, so I have to get there quickly before she fades to soil. What's this little morsel of otter? Are you waiting for me as a snack? Mrs. Otter knew the elf village was dangerous, but to be thought of as lunch was far beyond what she expected. So Mrs. Otter changed her shape to show her whole pelt, so that the dress wouldn't be ripped. Taking off the wrapper, how thoughtful. The hammerhead monster sneered, shaking the sea from his wide nose. Didn't your mother teach you any manners? Mrs. Otter returned to her full size and looked down at the hammerhead. Time to send you back to your mother to learn some manners. Lifting her tail and sliding it behind her, Mrs. Otter flung her tail at the hammerhead, who pinged off towards the sun with a very long yell. That's one way to deal with the rudeness of the hammerhead. The earth elf smirked. It's a nuisance if hammerheads don't even try to be less monster and use their manners. Mrs. Otter sighed, returned to her human-sized otter self and changed her full pelt for the thin gleaming blue dress. Where to next, and what's your name? Mrs. Otter asked, returning to the park bench to rest. My mother named me Clot when I was a baby because my hair looked like a clot of grass sticking straight up. We are going to your baker friend, right? Right, but it will be tomorrow, as I need to sleep now. Good idea. I can give you an invisible moss bed to sleep on if you don't mind sharing. Claude smiled and sneezed. I like to sleep near flowers when they sing at night. It's the perfect lullaby to me. Mrs. Otter smiled, yawning. Claude's moss bed was on top of the park bench, so Mrs. Otter shrank to half a human size to fit onto the little moss bed, but her tail still flopped over the edge. Hang on a minute, I'll just expand it for you, Claude said, yawning. As the sun whispers farewell and she chases the next day, evening quietens to night and a little round circle of light grew. Perfect for the flowers to showcase their night singing talents. Earth elves appeared and gathered in a crescent to hear the twilight choir. A soft sound carried in on the dead of night, whispering to their minds while caressing their ears. Harmony of such soothing magic that every earth elf was quiet in slumber when the glistening orb of night was at its highest. The choir of flowers closed their petals to rest after receiving slumber as an ovation. The park was almost quiet, except for the soft wind carrying the last murmur away. Me and Spitz by Tanya Humphreys. As I gazed down the dark alley, my tail twitched at its end. The fact that I could not control it was annoying to a control freak like me. Life in the streets was hard but far preferred to the neglect and abuse I'd endured throughout my kittenhood. My burns were still scabbed, and my left leg still crooked out at an angle where the woman had thrown an iron at me. There was plenty to feast upon down places like this, and as I slunk close to the trash bins at this end, I heard the scraping of tiny claws. I noted the fetid breeze was into my face, and that was good. Them ratties had an uncanny sense of smell. Himph, much like my own. This particular alley was behind an Italian place, the sense of garlic and basil strong amongst the offal in the bins. I stayed away from the alleys scented with ginger and soy. A couple weeks previously, I thought to myself, many rats here. Not much competition. No cats at all, a veritable feasting ground. I gorged myself on pork and chicken scraps drenched in greasy sauce and was fattening up for the coming winter quite nicely. I'd heard the despicable vermin in the bins but had plenty to eat. They stayed clear of me. Feeling brave, I tried a bite of some green stuff because it had an oystery smell to it. Blah, icky. The carrots were good though. As always, my ears were perked. I edged around a metal bin and there had been a dish there with scraps of fatty beef trimmings. I looked around, uneasy because this was a new thing. But humans were weird and did weird things all the time. The meat smells filled my nose, then my head. I came to the dish and licked at the meat. It was fresher than the other alley scraps, and that should have been a sign, a warning. About halfway through the meal, a rat popped up over the edge of the dish, its nose twitching in the gingery scented meat. I'd been flabbergasted at how brazen the little guy was. My ears lowered and I growled a warning. "Get away, this feast is mine." The sleek ash-colored rat said, "You fucking boob. They're right behind you." It scurried away like gray lightning. I froze, my ears like radar dishes. And then, I detected the ruffle of a piece of clothing right behind me. I didn't even think. I ran, my claws scrabbling on the cobblestones, my tail whipping back and forth as my rudder. I heard the clanging thunk of iron batter the cobblestone directly at my back. At the corner just outside the alley a large SUV sat. I scurried under it and watched the Chinese man dressed in cook's whites leap from the alley. He brandished a cleaver that caught the moonlight on its honed edge. The man cursed in his sing-songy language and took off back down the alley. His slippered feet made barely audible pattering sounds. As my heartbeat gradually faded from my ears, I realized my tail was stinging like mad. An inch was missing, the end a red clotted lump. I shuddered and vowed never again to traverse the alleys behind Chinese restaurants. So, on this chilly winter night, the alley was festering with rats. Scraps were meager in this season. I bared my teeth to the vermin coming within my hemisphere. It was very cold. Just the night before I'd come across an old Tom curled up and like a striped, gray kidney bean. He was frozen solid. By morning his eyes would be gone. After sated, I thought about where I would sleep. A car engine ticked. Outside the alley a long dark car idled like a great white shark patiently casing a beach boardwalk, its chrome grille gleaming in the lamplight like monster teeth. Its big vintage engine rumbled. As I got closer, I felt warm vibrations waft over my chilled fur and was powerless to stop my hypnotized feet. Against my better judgment, I crawled up into the undercarriage. As luck would have it, I discovered pitted, rusty patches in the floor pan. And small holes. The metal flaked away from one the size of my head and I squirmed up into the pitch-black space underneath the rear bench seat. Oh, blessed warmth. My purring emulated the engine noise as slept like a happy bear. The floor under me was rocking pleasantly side to side. It was like being in the womb again. As I woke, I heard human voices in the car above me. "Dude, here, you gotta try this. Dude, I'm driving, quit it. We just passed a cop. Pass it back." Alright. Sha. Uth. There were 3 humans in the car. The one driving was annoyed but game. There was a second human in the passenger seat and a third in the seat just over where I hid, curled up and in shadow. "Dude." The voice from the back seat. "Oh, okay, we nearly there. Gimme the J. Sauce. HM, that's some good shit, G-Rod. Told you dat. Haha." The windows were up, and sweet pungent smoke filled the car. I'm a cat. I can't close my nose. My head began to swell and throb like a disco bouncy house in slow motion. Rubber balls popped from my ears and tiny lights twinkled at my peripheral vision like colorful fireflies dancing to the disco rhythm. It was terrifying. My mouth was desert dry, my gummy tongue stuck to my teeth, and I realized I was grinning. I swiped a paw over my mouth, but seconds later my lips curled upwards again. I was going insane. The car slowed and stopped. My fat rubber head was swimming. My body felt boneless. I was dying. Fine. So be it. Sleep, sleep, deep, fathomless sleep, a coma. Hey you. Poke, poke, poke on my forehead. Hoea. Mua, mua, mua. Yucky taste in my dry mouth. Yeah. You got stoned, dude. First time, I get it. You're a rat. The rat turned around and looked at himself as if decked out at a fancy ball. Yup. Sure am. I breathed in a breath and still felt stoned, as the rat had declared. I squashed the desire to pounce upon him. I summoned up a drop of saliva and tried again. Why aren't you afraid of me? I could eat you. Iria, right. The cheeky bastard gave me a cheesy 2 thumbs up, like a casino dealer hamming it up for a blackjack winner. I lifted a paw and was mortified to find myself moving in slow motion, as if swimming through grape jelly. The cheeky little vermin snickered. You can't eat me. I'm your only way out of this. Dang, gotta stop doing that. I'll be fine. Just thirsty. Really, really thirsty. Did I say that aloud? Yeah, you did. The rat dragged over an empty plastic bottle. There was a hole chewed through the side near the top, and I could hear sloshing in the bottom. He placed it on its side, and when I stretched my tongue into the hole, it dunked in water. Warm, old, plasticky water, but oh man, I would never again undervalue the precious essence of water. I said, "Why are you doing this? Why are you so sure I won't eat you? Look, fuzzbutt, I've been living in this cougar for..." Cougar? Yeah, as in Mercury. The insolent prick placed paws on his hips in a swishy way. I wanted to bite his head off. I was the better species. He was lolly-poo. How dare he condescend to me? But he seemed so sure. And, anyways, been living here a while, and I gotta tell ya, these humans are no good. Speak of the devils. The car doors opened, the chassis rocked, the doors thunked solidly closed. Dude, did ya see that brain matter? It was the young man in the back seat. Oh man, it was the passenger man. The driver said nothing, but his breathing was as heavy as the other two's. Ha 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 ha. The laughter was the passenger's, high-pitched, girl-like. Yeah, I saw it, man. 'Twas like a Picasso in gray and red. Ha 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 ya. Get a load of this shit. It's so pure it's glowin'. Said backseat. Dude, pass it here. I want a taste. Passenger, aka G-Rod. Click. Sausage. Oth. Mikey? Asked G-Rod. Fuck yeah. Shas. Under the seat, I braced myself for the hotboxing of the car. It would be the death of me. Hey, turnip balls, they ain't smokin' weed no more. Look, name's Bugsy. Okay. Spitz. The rat said and pointed to his chest. They've moved on to crack. Cocaine. In the dark, my cat eyes saw Spitz roll his own. I resisted the urge to slash his throat. Duh, he said. So, what's stopping me from eating you? Why do I need you? What do you want from me? Spitz gestured a slow-down motion with his tiny pink paws, like you see highway workers do when allowing cars to pass their barricade. You need to see this first. He turned bravely away and went through the rusted-out hole I'd climbed through. I followed him into the trunk. There were a few more holes in here. The keyhole was a circle. There were a couple of smaller holes where the cougar's symbol might have been. My eyes sucked in light and adjusted a little slower than normal. I was still baked but adjusting out of necessity. Spitz pointed to a wooden box in the corner of the trunk. He had apparently gnawed through the keyhole. The top was loose. He beckoned me too. A sharp jaggle and the car slewed a bit. Raucous laughter interspersed with curses from the humans in the car. Spitz said, "There's not much time left. They'll be accelerating soon." I was confused, but still dazed, and found myself trusting the wee vermin's words. Hell, thought I was dying. Maybe I'm dead and this is just. Open it. I opened the crate in the trunk and stared at the skulls in there. White, eyeless, gaping. At least 2 were cats. One was a dog. There were smaller ones. They will add yours if they catch you. Hug. They collect skulls. And if they find me, who stupidly walked right into their vision. Yup, you're next. Unless you promise to help me. I was flabbergasted again for the 3rd time in such a short period. I refused to say, "What?" again and sound like an idiot. I said instead, "What are you planning and how can I help?" I was amazed in hindsight I'd said those words to a rat. Spitz said, "I'll need you to help me home." I did it again. What do you want me to do? Get in the box? Are you fucking kidding me? No, it'll be the safest place. When in the box, brace yourself against the walls. I saw that the box, the crypt, was secured to the walls of the trunk by bungee cords. I nodded, still not entirely sure I was alive or dead or maybe in a coma. Spitz disappeared like a magician with a flourish of a cape. I begrudgingly admired the wee vermin's tenacity. As he disappeared, he said, "Trust me." I did. I got into the miniature abattoir and braced myself like he'd said. The big black muscle car accelerated up a steep hill. I heard the young men laughing, wasted, still talking of the night's escapades. Blew da fucker's eyeballs outta his punk ass. "Pass dat you mofo. Ha 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 ha." As the car accelerated via downhill motion, like a roller coaster, the voices got higher, interspersed with laughter. In the trunk in the box, I braced myself just as the rat, Spitz, had commanded. The young men's voices above filtered through to my ears. "Dude, what da fuck? Slow down. Yeah man, stop playing. Why yeah? I got no brakes man." I understood in my hidey hole that Spitz had killed their brakes. I braced for the impact, but it took ages coming. I heard the screams of the young men as they realized they were truly fucked. I didn't think they wore seatbelts. When the car crunched to a stop at the end of a long downhill curve, it flipped. I heard the bodies inside the car tumble and wham against stuff, seats, bags, who knew? The car landed on its side. Only me and the rat crept out. We looked upon the bloody bodies and then looked at each other. Spitz said, "Look, this is what I do. You wanna come on board? Whatever, you're welcome. I just need a ride back to London if ya don't mind." I had grown to admire this rat. "Ugh," I said. "Okay, I'll give you a ride back to town and think on, Okay, yeah, sure. I'm down. I'm down.